today by welcoming our special guests. We have, I think, people from the Democratic Party. I think we've got folks from the Republican Party. This was open to the public. These are not guests of ours. They were not invited, but all are welcome. I am joined this morning by members of our team and by a Texas Ranger, members of the state's greatest and long-serving law enforcement agency. I'm joined by Texas Ranger Ryan Christian. By Ryan Christian. I always want to add that to his name. By our first assistant, David Mitchum. By Mike Levine, our public corruption prosecutor. And George Jordan, also a prosecutor with our public corruption division. I want to thank them for what has been a long and thorough investigation of the 2022 election, general election. You know, anytime that 2 or more affidavits are filed by citizens in the state of Texas complaining about an election violation, by law, the district attorney is required to investigate. That is what happened in this election. Multiple affidavits were filed, sent to us immediately after the election, and we did what we always do. We called in an independent investigative agency, the Texas Rangers. The investigation actually began shortly after the election. And we now know, because the Secretary of State's office has done a preliminary report on Harris County's general election of 2022, that there were major problems with that election. We all remember long lines, some disruption in voting because of the machines, but primarily the complaints were lack of paper ballots, that voting locations ran out of paper. Some have said this was directed at one party. Our investigation has not found that to be so. However, the Secretary of State's office has said that the insufficient distribution of ballot paper to polling locations and the loss of an effective monitoring system resulting in those ballot paper shortages at multiple polling locations across Harris County and on Election Day is attributed to a cessation of voting at certain locations. You can look at this public report and find what the Secretary of State's office found and reported as their findings publicly to support them, why they found what they found. Now, we know that voting was disrupted. We know that there are some people in Harris County who did not get to vote. We know this was a failure in terms of an election that the government has a responsibility to run effectively, ethically, and most importantly, accurately. Here's what the criminal investigation found, because while we didn't know how it happened, now we do. Defendant Daryl Blackburn, who worked in the now defunct Elections Administrator's Office, has been charged with 6 felony charges, 5 of them tampering with a document, 1 theft by public official. This individual was specifically assigned to see that paper was allocated properly in all of the polling locations. He had other responsibilities equally as important, but this is really the nuts and bolts of the election, the allocation of paper. And it is at the heart of much of what the problem was back in November of 2022. Unfortunately, under the not-so-watchful eye of Isabel Longoria and later Clifford Tatum, Mr. Blackburn represented that he worked full-time for Harris County, while in truth, he worked a second full-time job elsewhere. The result is he didn't do his job for Harris County. Can't do 2 full-time jobs and give them the credit and the attention that they need. You may remember that Isabel Longoria was appointed. She had not been employed prior to her appointment, and she left in ignominy after the primary election of 2022. She was followed by Clifford Tatum, an individual who remains employed with Harris County in Precinct 2. Now, while working for the elections office, Mr. Blackburn not only stole thousands of dollars from Harris County in the sense that he lied on timesheets, much more importantly, he stole individuals' right to vote, a basic constitutional right in our democracy, because people on both sides were delayed in their voting, halted in their voting, rerouted in their voting. I don't know that we'll actually know the damage there. But it's compounded by the loss of public trust in our election system here in Harris County. That is the real cost, and it is priceless. You know, it's interesting that the greed of one person, where checks and balances have been removed, where folks like Mr. Blackburn were allowed to work from home. I'll tell you, the scheme was crude in terms of stealing from the county. Nothing sophisticated here. And yet the consequences were massive. Some of those consequences are that there have been hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in terms of investigations, not just the cost of the Texas Rangers and our prosecutors, but the Secretary of State's office and countless private litigants. The millions lost, though, does not compare to the damage done in terms of whether people will feel good about going to vote, and we want them to. By holding Darrell Blackburn criminally responsible, we can at least attribute criminal responsibility to this individual, a public servant who did not serve, who instead fleeced taxpayers for his salary, and we paid a much greater consequential result for his actions. I do want to say that the investigation found no evidence of intent to impact the outcome of the election for either party. But it is undeniable that there is a lot of evidence to show that Mr. Blackburn's crime did impact the election. We know that the issue remains open in the civil courts in that a new election has been ordered in the 180th District Court and is scheduled for May of 2025. And so the long-term consequences of Darrell Blackburn's actions and the failure to appropriately run and supervise an office by two appointed officials not elected by the public cost Harris County residents a great deal. We hope it didn't cost you your vote. We want you to vote again. And we want you to know that the biggest responsibility of the district attorney's office is not to favor one party or the other. It is to do our job objectively in getting down to the facts of what really happened. And we rely upon the Texas Rangers to help us do that. I rely upon our public corruption prosecutors, and that is why it is clearly extremely important to look at these crimes in a non-partisan way and go based on the evidence by applying the law, which is our oath in Texas as prosecutors. To give you details about the scheme of the theft and the scope of it, Mike Levine will come forward now.
You bet. Thank you, Madam District Attorney. Thank you, Texas Ranger Ryan Christian. Thank you, DA Investigator George Jordan. Thank you to our paralegals and so many other folks who worked a lot of hours over a lot of months. There is a 17-page probable cause statement that goes into far greater detail than I will be able to go into today. If it's not on the district clerk website yet, I'm sure it will be by morning. I will just give a brief summary of what it is that we have found. Charged defendant was hired by Harris County initially as a temp employee and then full-time by the Elections Administration in April of 2021. He was in charge of calculating allocations for Harris County elections. That means how many voting, what they call duos, the machines you vote on, as well as ballot paper. He was charged with doing this both through early voting and then on Election Day in November of 2022. Ultimately, his miscalculations regarding ballot paper caused major disruptions on Election Day, November 8th, 2022, of which most of you are aware. As Diog mentioned, by law, when two or more people complain via sworn affidavits, which did happen here, this office is required to investigate. That's what happened. To be clear, and I want to be very clear about this. This investigation has revealed no evidence that anyone intentionally acted in any way to suppress voter turnout or to close certain voting locations based on known voting tendencies, nor did anyone take any action that we found with an intent to sway an election. The motive here was much simpler and much older. It was greed. In the course of investigating, we learned that this defendant acquired a high-paying oil and gas industry job in October of 2021. In fact, our own DA investigator Jordan really stumbled upon while reviewing social media. Mr. Blackburn then worked 2 full-time jobs at the exact same dates, at the exact same times, at the exact same hours for 15 months. This is not somebody who said they left work at 3 and left at 4. This is 15 months of sustained double dipping on timesheets. He worked exclusively from home for Harris County, yet frequently worked in person at his other higher-paying job in the Woodlands. He claimed the same time on timesheet after timesheet. That gave rise to the 5 tampering with government document charges we have filed. Those are state jail felonies. They're punishable by up to 2 years in state jail. And finally, and most offensively, in May of 2022, this defendant requested paid parental leave. That is a Harris County benefit that allows a new parent to take 12 weeks of paid leave without having to use comp and vacation and sick time. In the case of this defendant, it essentially amounted to a nearly $21,000 bonus to which he was not entitled. A diligent Harris County HR employee made sure to ask him to sign a specific provision right before he took that leave, saying he was aware of the policy. He knew he could not work another full-time job, or any job for that matter, while on paid parental leave. At the time he signed that document, he had already been working another full-time job for 6 months. He continued to do it throughout the period of his paid parental leave from the county. That's given rise to the other charge we filed, which is known as theft by public servant. It is a 3rd-degree felony, punishable by up to 10 years in TDC. We had our first setting in court today. Bonds were set at $40,000 on that theft charge, $5,000 on each of the 5 tampering charges. Thank you.
Biggest spell is...
Yes, Blackburn is like the color black, B-U-R-N. Darryl, D-A-R-R-Y-L.
Do you know Breda Birchlingham?
I do, but I'm not going to give that right now. I'm sure it's going to be in the PC statement that you'll see.
We're going to talk about Election Day itself.
Sure. In the course of our election, Ranger Christian and George Jordan interviewed dozens of people. Before we were involved, you interviewed, 20 election judges. And again, I want to stress, there was no evidence that somebody was trying to sway this outcome in favor of any particular party or candidate, but there was chaos, I think is a fair word, at a lot of polling sites. There were polling sites that ran out of ballot paper and had to close for anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours and turn away some voters. Due to this investigation, the Texas Secretary of State audit, the negligence and malfeasance of this supposed professional with the county has cost the state millions of dollars.
Didn't he work more than 24 hours on election?
He did. He claimed, I think, 18 hours with the county, specifically on November 8th. He also went up to the Woodlands and got paid to work 8 hours at his other job. That's 26 hours in that one day if you're counting.
That's Election Day. So while chaos was ensuing at polling places all over Harris County, Darrell Blackburn was at work at his other job, the real job, and was not minding his post, and came back, but it was too late.
How can you say that there was no attempt to impact the outcome of the election when the vast majority of the polling locations were Republican locations that ran out of ballots?
You want to address that?
First off, I don't know that the audit that the Texas Secretary of State concluded did reach that conclusion. I will tell you, though, that our focus here is narrow. We are criminal prosecutors. Basis of the criminal law is intent. We found no evidence of any criminal intent by Mr. Blackburn or anyone else to make sure that certain locations ran out of ballot paper. In fact, quite honestly, his biggest mistake was giving, 98%, is it? 98% of locations got the same amount of paper. Rather than putting more specified thought into which locations needed more paper, he made a sort of lazy blanket allocation to far too many locations, many of whom on either side of the aisle needed more paper, as it turned out.
So we're not saying it didn't impact the election. Clearly, his actions impacted the election. The lack of supervision impacted it. That is how he was able to commit the crime and not do his job for Harris County. So the elections office didn't perform as they were required to perform or even follow basic just employment tenets, checking on employees, quote, working at home. I know that we can't work at home, and yet many county departments apparently still do. This was one that had very lax policies. So it impacted the election. The civil courts have been dealing with how it impacted them. We just know that no evidence supported the fact that Darrell Blackburn was trying to skew it one way or the other. He didn't do his job.
What was his official title with the counties?
Data analyst,
Data analyst. Can you spell your name?
And how much did he make?
LEVI and $43 an hour, so about $86,000 to $88,000.
Yeah. So Blackburn's a $43 an hour employee.
How much did he make at the oil and gas? Was it Exxon?
It was not Exxon. I can tell you that in about the 15-month overlapping period, we calculated that while he made over $90,000 with the county, he made over $250,000 at the same time period with an oil and gas job.
Had anybody from the elections office even gotten on LinkedIn? They could have discovered it. So nobody was minding the store.
And I'm sorry, just to be clear, I get the part about the paternal leave and good sign of these papers and you can't put somewhere else. Is it also county policy that he is not allowed to take a second job or second full-time job?
Yeah. I will tell you that this was not a side hustle. This was not a weekend's job. This was not a night's job. Ranger Christian spoke to witnesses, got emails from the other job. These were both happening at the same time.
And is it, I'm sorry, just so I'm there, is it county policy that needs lateral?
I'll answer that. Certainly can't do it. So you have to ask the Harris County HR group about their policies. We have a thick manual. We've, of course, read it and are charged with knowing it. It is not allowable to claim the same hours for two jobs. Extra jobs can be, in certain departments, approved. This was not an approved extra job.
So, have you opened an investigation into the alleged classification of government documents regarding the Housing Authority, 800 Middle Street, the environmental dangers, and the falsification of documents?
We normally don't deny or confirm whether we've got a public corruption investigation going. There has been some action on that by other entities, but I'm not prepared to tell you right now where we are on that if we are investigating. I'm just not ready to tell you yes or no on that one. You bet.
Back to Blackburn. Do you guys believe right now that he is the sole issue for this paper ballot problem that you guys have in November 2022? Is anybody else facing charges? There's other two people that you mentioned getting with the news conference who may be facing charges. Like, what does it look like? Because right now it seems like one person is charged for this, but it was overseeing his actions, his role throughout all of it.
Well, the Harris County Commissioners Court are the ones who placed themselves, I guess, in supervisory control because they created the Office of Elections Administration. It didn't exist prior to 2020, and it hasn't existed since the legislature eliminated it. So they had control. The elections administrators, Isabel Longoria and Clifford Tatum, did not report to the public. They are not elected. They were appointed by the commissioners. So I guess if they reported to anybody, it would be to the commissioners and county judge. It's unclear to us whether they ever reported to anybody other than the statements that they made in commissioner's court. I know that Longoria, it's my understanding she wasn't employed before receiving this job. I'm not sure Tatum came out of another state. We see a lot of people from other places appointed here in this county at times.
Is there any evidence that the higher-ups, his bosses, knew that he was doing?
There's no evidence to show that they did or didn't.
No other charges then pending?
No other charges pending.
Does this conclude the investigation into that election in terms of, should we be waiting for more to come out in terms of election fraud that isn't related to this timesheet issue, or is this sort of a conclusive ending to that investigation?
This is a conclusion. August of 2024 for a November 2022 election. We have put all the resources that we have into it, as have the Rangers. As you know, we're very understaffed, remain understaffed, but we followed every complaint. The affidavits were thoroughly investigated by the Rangers, and the result, it's ironic. People are looking for complex, conspiratorial reasons for things happening, and often it boils down to incompetence and greed. And even though that was affected on a relatively small scale by one person, it affected millions of us. And it did deprive people of votes. When you have to wait up to 3 hours or be redirected, regular people have kids to pick up, jobs to get to. And so running the elections is a very, very basic and critical function of government. And the Elections Administrative Office does not exist anymore.
And you can't do it to 15 months. What other things that say to fight elections?
That's a good question. I just know that we spent a lot of time and money in terms of staff power. I know that the Rangers did. I know that the Secretary of State's office did. Both parties have litigated the issue. So there were many, many people impacted, and we have another election to go for the 180th next May. And so the county is not finished paying for the debacle that was the Elections Office, Office of Election Administration.
Surely Blackburn wasn't the only person responsible for the distribution of polling beavers, right? How many employees were first?
He was in charge of allocating. Distribution was simply secondary. And those employees, there's no evidence to indicate that they did anything other than take what was allocated. But to give all the polling places the same amount of paper, almost on its face shows you Darrell Blackburn wasn't doing anything but dividing. It looks like the number of polling places by the, amount of paper he had.
I know you started. Can you give us again punishments for each of these? Tampering is how much, and that's by public benefit?
Sure. Tampering is a state jail felony. The way the code reads is it's Class A misdemeanor, but if done with intent to defraud or harm, it becomes a state jail felony, which is what we've alleged. That makes it punishable by up to 2 years in state jail on each of those 5 charges. The theft by public servant is a third-degree felony, so it's punishable by up to 10 years in Texas Department of Corrections.
Does he have any priors?
He does not.
Is there a press release we'll be getting, or can I ask you one more time to state the charges and the number of counts?
I will tell you there is a 17-page probable cause statement that you can probably see right now on the clerk's website.
No, it's public record. There are 6 charges of tampering with the government.
5 of 10.
6 total charges, 5 tampering with a government document, state jail felony, 1 theft by a public servant. And
I know you said you can't give his date of birth and real Malabi's age.
he's in his mid-30s.
Yeah. 35.
Right. The status of the defendant right now is he is not in custody. Our public corruption prosecutors have been in touch with his lawyer.
So he did get placed on bond this morning.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so he turned himself in. Judge set the bond this morning.
Yep.
Well,
So
we don't know, but the judge set the bond at $65,000. Is that in all the cases or each of the cases?
total.
And voter look shots?
We don't. Sheriff's Department keeps those. Sherman's looking for a one-stop shop.
And I am, because I don't have his DOB.
Yeah, we still don't. I think he's 35. Why can't we give the DOB?
I can if you want me to. I think it's 5/18/89.
There you go.
Got my head without looking.
There you go.
There you
All right. Questions? Yes.
Clarifies the charges stem from a grand jury.
Well,
Up in the grand jury.
no. The grand jury is useful in that many records are obtained through grand jury subpoenas, which are part of a grand jury investigation. These were hard charges that were filed, meaning Michael got the warrant signed, dealt with the defense lawyer, and filed them with the clerk's office. Anything else? All right. Thank y'all very much.